Hello and welcome to West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Alderson, and my mate Darcy Cox. I think this is the first time we've done this setup. Usually it's you and Cal, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure we've done a breakdown to that. We've done plenty of extra times, and there's going to be a big old extra time this week as well, because Lord knows it's needed. Cal's missed a good one; he's away on holiday, and unfortunately, we remain here to discuss a 1-1 draw with Southampton. We spoke on the preview about how important it would be that West Ham won and won convincingly in this game. The outcomes were far from that, weren't they?
Yeah, well, definitely not the convincing win that we were hoping for. Yeah, I mean, I remember we both said at the end of it we were quite nervous, right? Excited but nervous. And I think this is the exact reason that we were nervous, that it could not go the way that we want it to. And then potentially there's a lot of home truths to be faced, and lots of things that aren't particularly nice to learn that we would learn. And I think maybe that's what happened. I mean, that's what we're here to talk about, right?
Yeah, precisely. I think lots of positive things have been done over the last month, 2 months that we've been with Graham Potter, but ultimately progress is defined by performances on the pitch and results. And if results aren't forthcoming and performances are inconsistent, then it becomes more and more challenging to be positive about the areas where there has been development, because ultimately it's not leading to enough of a change in the form and performance of the club. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff on this episode. There's a lot to get through, and I'm sure we are not going to get through all of it unless you'd all like to sit here for 2 hours and listen to me complain for the vast majority of it. So we are going to go on and do the rest of the conversation that we don't get to today on extra time. Patreon.com/Analytics United to join us over there. You can get the first week free, which, yeah, I think everyone associated with West Ham deserves right now. If you're going to consume any extra West Ham content at the moment, I think it probably should be free. Because we are very much suffering. But yeah, so the main things we're going to go into are obviously what happened in the game. Did we deserve the draw? Did Southampton deserve their draw? And was the result a fair reflection of both sides' performances? But then more so as we approach 1 year on from the end of David Moyes, from the successes and then ultimate, certainly in the league, failures that followed at the end of his tenure. What progress has been made or otherwise, and where are we at this point? And I think this is the time to do that, as much as it would have been really nice to do that on the back of a stronger performance. I think this is a pretty clear indication. I think we saw lots of the overarching issues in this game, so it's a good opportunity to really reflect on what's happened across this season. And kind of look ahead to therefore what truths need to be told, like Darcy said, what home truths need to be talked about, and that should hopefully provide us some kind of platform to move forward. First of all, Darcy, let's start with just kind of an overarching summary of the game. Usually we go into a lot of the kind of minutiae, the different tactical ideas, what went well, what went wrong, what happened when changes were made. And we kind of have decided to dispense with some of the usual structure of the podcast today, because ultimately I think once you've discussed the level of the performance, you've covered the match, even if there were more things happening beneath the surface, right?
Yeah. It's I mean, tactics are always important, and it would be weird of us to come out and say they're not important. But yeah, I think really this is a good, like you said, it's a very good point in the season, after a result that I think, I don't want to say we didn't expect it, but really shouldn't have happened. I think it's a good time for an inquest, and maybe less about what's happening on a week to week basis, you know?
Yeah, and to reference the performance directly, It was rubbish.
Yeah.
We played particularly poorly in this game. I think Graham Potter said it afterwards that not too many players could have come off the pitch saying that they played well. We obviously had the Nicholas Fulker's comments after the game where he was clearly furious with the level of the team performance, particularly in the second half of the second half. We are going to do a little bit of coverage on kind of what the ideas were and whether they contributed at all. And we did start, well, I mean, we debated on the preview whether to go with a back three or a back four and what would be the right way to approach this. I think Aaron Wan-Bissaka's injury had quite a big impact on a lot of the ideas that maybe would have been put forward into this game. But box midfield was retained, but there was a bit of a change in terms of how that was organised from how we would typically see it at West Ham under Potter, right?
Yeah. So there were some constants that I think we've seen quite regularly. So we had James Ward-Prowse was always on the first line. He was always deeper. And then you had Kudus always high. But actually there was some rotation built in between Paquetá and Soler, which meant that you could get those guys popping up in different areas. And I think on paper anyway, that's, it's a nice idea. It's a good dynamic to try and build into the team, especially when you're playing a team like Southampton. In theory, obviously it didn't translate like that. We actually saw, I guess, outside of the first 10 minutes, kind of a lack of creation. No real issues sort of keeping the ball and bringing it forward to a certain extent, but really not looking dangerous in any way at all, despite having that extra body in there.
I think the idea of trying to create some level of rotation that would cause real challenges for any system that would be man-oriented or any responsibilities that would be particularly man-oriented, a really nice way to approach this. We've seen how that's caused us problems already this season. Arsenal came to our place and were really heavily rotational in midfield, and it caused us huge amounts of problems. It's really difficult for our players to deal with that. But as you say, I think even though some of the ideas on paper were quite nice, we saw Paquetá kind of out on the left defensively, but then drifting into more central areas. Soler was kind of dictating how other players would move, where he would then move in the team. So he would often advance into one of the points in the box, one of the number 10 positions, but he could move to the left or to the right. That would then dictate where Kudus went, and often where he drifted from would dictate whether Paquetá would kind of fill in on the left side of deeper midfield alongside Ward-Prowse and towards the right. I would say the most common organisation we saw was like Paquetá to the right, Soler to sort of the right 10, and Kudus left 10 is the most common. First 10 minutes with some nice kind of progression, and there was a bit of penetration and chance creation, a couple of balls dangerous balls towards Fulkrug, and really nice sort of first 5 minutes to the game. We had a nice tempo about us. I thought we looked somewhat threatening in that period. From that point onwards, though, I mean, it just tailed off dramatically, sort of almost off the edge of a cliff, and the out of possession strategy for the game just didn't work at all, did it?
No, it really didn't. And I think once the game started to settle a little bit, that's kind of the thing that took the momentum out from our legs. So we set up 4-2-3-1 without the ball. And we didn't, on our left side, we actually seemed to defend all right. It was when the ball went down our right, we seemed to struggle a little bit more, because you had Bowen jumping out to their wide centre-back. But his
Jack
timing...
Stevens, yeah.
Yeah, and his timing was a little bit off, and what it meant was yeah,
it's so measured.
Yeah. I'm trying my best to not let the anger sort of seep through, or disappointment, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, the timing was bad in terms of the way we were pressing, essentially. And what it meant is down Soufal's side, down the right, he was often being isolated 2v1. So he had Ryan Manning, their left wing back, and then Kamaldeen Sulemana as well, both out there, because Sulemana was actually pinning quite wide. Whereas on the other side, Mateus Fernandes was sort of coming into the pitch. So it was actually easier to deal with for Emerson. That's why we were having less issues out there. But down our right side, that became a real issue that we didn't really have a solve for, even through kind of like broader structural changes as well.
Yeah, it was complicated as well, but the fact that we saw a lot of Paul Onuachu kind of drifting onto Jean-Claire Todibo. So if you imagine that on the other side, if Fernandes is coming inside the pitch and Onuachu is kind of drifting also towards the left, it's a little bit easier for Emerson to kind of move out and press onto the wing back, because there's not really any player holding him in the defensive line or pinning him deep. Where if he moves out, there's not necessarily naturally going to be someone there to cover that space. And the idea I think would have been that so far would have been able to jump out to Ryan Manning, Bowen up onto the wide centre back, and then Todibo should just be able to cover the wide space against Sulemana. But if Onuachu's rolling onto that side and kind of pinning Todibo inside, then if Sofal goes, I mean, Sulemana's just going to be free, and there isn't going to be anyone there to mark him. So we saw a lot of situations where Sofal would kind of like maybe get halfway and then realise, well, I can't, I'm going to have to go back in. Or situations, frankly, where I'm not entirely sure what Bowen was doing, where he was scanning, seeing that Ryan Manning was free, seeing that Sofal couldn't jump. He'd look behind him, see that that was the situation, but then continue to go out and press onto Stevens, which made it very easy for Southampton to just kind of play to Manning, because there was no one in our structure, no one in our out of possession setup that could get anywhere near him, really. It made it very easy for them to progress to the final third. He said on the left that we found things a little bit easier. I think the jumps made more sense and operated slightly better. We saw situations where Emerson was able to get out to Walker-Peters. But I thought the way that they were able to play inside off Flynn Downs and then advance either through Fernandes or again through Walker-Peters outside with a little 1-2, well, that was near shambolic, really. I mean, some of the initial ideas and the execution of those ideas made more sense, like I say, but actually when it came to, you know, Kudus starting as a number 10 and tracking back with one of the double pivot to make sure that there wasn't an easy 1-2 option, that didn't really happen at all. I mean, Kudus would stand in the number 10 space, watch Flynn Downs run past him to go and receive a return pass from Walker-Peters and kind of not do anything, kind of not move to adjust his positioning to help. And then that's kind of compounded by the fact that Matej Fernandes or another player, even Onuachu, could roll out towards the right flank, and you get Ward-Prowse then dragged back to kind of fill the gap that Emerson's just left, which opens up the centre even more. So I just think these really, really, I mean, I'm sorry to put it in these terms, but these really very simple sort of 3-4-3 sequences that you see all the time, where the wide centre-back plays to the wing-back, the ball goes inside, you try and then advance around the other side to receive. But it just worked every time Southampton tried to do it. And not in the sense that, okay, yeah, we've committed bodies forward and we're maybe short, and then in these situations there's players that are left 2v1 and stuff, and you kind of anticipate and expect that there are going to be some moments where teams are able to progress and cut through you. But more so, actually, West Ham 11 bodies behind the ball, all in our own half. Southampton able to then play 2-3 passes and cut 4, 5, 6 players out of the game and arrive in the final third in really positive situations, where I think we then got quite fortunate with refereeing decisions. I think Sofal, as we described, left so overloaded on so many occasions, made a number of fouls, and was kind of quite fortunate, I think, to stay on the pitch. At the end of the first half, there was a swipe on Matej Fernandes that went unpunished, didn't get given as a free kick, and I thought that was, yes, from Southampton's perspective, particularly unfortunate. And just briefly to linger on Matej Fernandes, I do think there are some good players in that Southampton team, but of all of those players this season, I think the one that's produced at a more consistent level always looked quite impressive to me when I've seen them. Played very well in this game. I just cannot see him going down to the Championship. I think he was very difficult to deal with, very good in all phases, duels well, presses well, progresses very well, creates in the final third, a danger himself in the box. I think his dribbling is really impressive too. So I think he's a very, very good player. I'd be amazed if there aren't several clubs that are interested in recruiting him come the end of this season. What changed? Because there were lots of changes, weren't there, in the game? You know, obviously there were the substitutions, players taken off in the second half, and there was sort of a lot of consternation about that online. But there were lots of sort of changes structurally that preceded that as well, right?
Yeah. I think the first of those came like halfway through the first half as well. But basically, once we realised, I'm not sure if it was purely for out of possession sort of reasons, because I don't know if it actually helped us, but we switched to a 4-3-3 where we saw Kudus just go out on the right, and then Kudus on the left, Bowen on the right, and then you just had a midfield three of Ward-Prowse, Soler, and Paquetá. And I think it maybe like marginally benefited us on the ball, just because you had, Paquetá moving inside, kind of built in to the shape, and the dynamic between him and Soler was a little bit more simple. But in terms of the actual issues that were being caused out of possession, I don't think anything really improved, because it's not all that different, really. You're just kind of switching around the personnel rather than players. And then by the time we got to the second half, I think we sort of moved back into a 4-2-3-1, but we just saw Soler more as the attacking midfielder. Again, I'm not really sure it massively helped us out of possession, because we essentially just ended up a little bit deeper. It meant we had more coverage out wide, but we were inviting a little bit more pressure. And then I think there was even a point where we ended up with two up top, in like a 4-4-2, and then that became a 5-3-2 as more changes came, and those last two are kind of more dependent on changes. And none of it really sort of had the desired effect, I don't think. You didn't actually see much change in terms of the outcomes we were seeing. It was all a little bit like we're able to keep the ball for some sort of sustained period, and then the ball would end up being either launched forward or lost in a 1v1 or something like that, and then actually Southampton would be sort of invited forward a little bit. I feel like we really struggled to press out of any of these shapes. So yeah, it's I guess it's kind of a weird place to end up in, right? That, well, changing the personnel is not working very well, but neither is changing the shape, which I think indicates some sort of heavier underlying issue.
Yeah, I think for all of the changes of shape, for all of the changes of personnel, I think we've just sort of equally poor, if not worse. Across the whole game. The kind of beginning story in possession was that, like you say, there was some good periods of circulation, playing around defence and stuff. But anytime we actually tried to then penetrate in any way, didn't seem to really come off for us. Didn't seem to even really look that threatening. There were lots of situations where, and it was a big conflict anyway at the start with Bowen's position, of kind of like Kudus and Bowen ending up in a lot of the same spaces, or Bowen and Southampton kind of ending up in a lot of the same spaces. And I think that made it difficult for kind of Bowen to get into the game from an in-possession point of view in terms of actually being a danger, being a threat. And then there were loads of situations where he kind of was making these runs in off the right-hand side to kind of go beyond Fulkrug. But because it's a back three rather than a back four, if he runs off the wing-back, there's just a centre-back sitting there. So there were loads of kind of like direct balls up to Bowen where Jack Stevens is just heading the ball away, rather than it actually being a situation where, he's 1v1 against someone and he might be able to kind of get off the back and or get him behind or win that duel. Didn't really happen for him at all. So, kind of a very weird performance to begin with in possession. Then second half, I think we saw something a little bit different. I think we, as you said, the defensive plan meant that we kind of invited them on a little bit more, and we saw more situations where maybe defending a little bit deeper, conceding, frankly, like more corners and throw-ins around our box and in our half, and then winning duels and actually being able to attack in a more direct kind of counter-attacking fashion. The way that we kind of know West Ham to be very good at. I thought the goal that we scored and then the follow-up chance that comes from Bowen later in the first half were very much kind of cookie cutter. What is the West Ham goal? If you had to kind of put your finger on what the West Ham goal is, what the most likely way West Ham will score will be, is that kind of surge up the left, play inside, and then play across to Bowen. He's kind of on the underloaded side. He's able to attack a 1v1. He's able to come inside and get a shot off. And he's frankly, he's devastating in those situations. He's probably the best, if not one of the best, maybe behind Salah, and Burmo's in that category as well. One of the best counter-attacking forwards in the division. He's absolutely sensational in those situations. So we saw a little bit more of that, which was a good thing. It was nice to see some of those situations. I actually thought Nicholas Fulkrug operated to a really high standard in that sort of counter-attacking plan, releasing some really good chances for Bowen. He also released a really good chance later in the match for Luis Guilherme, who perhaps should have done a little bit better, but arrived with the right timing. Really nice to see him getting into those situations. But yeah, if that kind of happened for maybe 20, 25 minutes, the last 20 minutes of the game, and we have to speak about them before we go on to sort of broader themes, and we will stop here when it comes to just speaking about this game in isolation. The last 20 minutes were genuinely horrendous, weren't they?
Yeah, it really was. Like I don't even really know where to start with it, to be honest. So much of, well, just a complete like it's almost like when I was speaking to you about it earlier, it's I was talking about the idea of like, appetite for risk and things like that. But I don't even really think it's about that. I think it's almost just like built into the players. As you get into the last 20 minutes and you have something, you're going to hold on to it. And I think you see within a lot of the players that the instinct is to hold on and drop a little bit deeper. There was a lot of, I don't want to say shirking of responsibility, because that seems a little bit too harsh, but I think there is very, maybe it's not too harsh because I can't think of an alternative.
I don't think it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, like I think that's maybe what it is, that a lot of players feel like, well, I don't want to be the one that goes to try and do something and therefore something bad happens because of that. And a lot of the players are kind of stuck in that mentality. And therefore we see what we saw in the last 20 minutes where people get on the ball, and 25 minutes ago we were able to retain the ball as long as you like. It was more that actually we couldn't create from retaining the ball, to now we get the ball and it's pump it down the channel or pump it down the middle of the pitch, and you haven't got Fulkrug to try and hold it up there. You've not necessarily got the kind of intensity and effort from the runners to go and chase that either. And either way, those players are outnumbered when they get on the ball anyway. And I think you're just seeing a lot of non-retention focused and negative actions over those last 20 minutes. And we watched it back again in isolation after watching the full game back again as well. And it's not something I'd recommend many fans do, because you'll find it very frustrating. But yeah, I think really what annoyed me the most was just how often we were playing short from a lot of goal kicks, and then goal kicks, every single person up towards the halfway line going long, no sort of intent to keep the ball in any way, shape or form. And basically just gave Southampton the last 15 minutes to be like, well, okay, you've held on 1-0 for this long, why don't you have a go?
Yeah, and important to note that all started happening before the changes, which is not to absolve Potter of responsibility for making some really obvious defensively motivated changes, which obviously does kind of then end up becoming a bit of a 6-2-2 almost at the end, where it was just sort of pack in and try and defend the box and stuff. But it was happening already. I mean, I think by minute 70, 71, 72, we're already looking at kind of Southampton possessing 75-80% of the ball. It's kind of all Southampton. And that's a real flip from where it was even like 5-10 minutes before that, where we had the majority of possession. As Darcy says, we were able to pass it around quite well. We didn't really threaten in those moments, but when we did lose the ball and have to defend, I mean, I made a joke earlier when we were watching the game, watching that period of the match. It's like, well, we might be better off, instead of retaining the ball here, just tonking it off for a corner to Southampton, defending the corner, and then trying to generate an attack. And then the sort of last 20 minutes, you forget tonking it off for a corner and attacking in transition. It's just like Areola banging the ball long. A lot. We know what Areola's long distribution is like. He's not often finding the targets that he's aiming for. So even when Fulkrug was on the pitch, he's missing Fulkrug by 5-10 yards after time. You've got players not contesting for the first ball. Some players not even trying to contest for the second ball. A lot of just kind of, right, well, the ball goes long, and then we pack in and we defend. And really disappointing. I have to say, I'm sorry we try and stay very measured and very balanced on this podcast, but really disappointing the last sort of 5 minutes plus stoppage time of the game. Really, really not good enough from so many of the players on the pitch. You just cannot, against Southampton, who really one of the worst sides the Premier League has ever seen, sit and hold hands in a line on the edge of your own box, with opportunities to get out, with moments where we got the ball, with moments where we were able to get the ball up the pitch. There's a moment where Luis Guilherme does really well and drags us sort of 60 yards up the pitch before losing possession. He turns the ball over and turns around, and the entire rest of the team is still standing on the edge of our own box. There's like a 70-yard gap from where the ball is to where the defensive line is, which is just like inexcusable. You just cannot get away with that in the Premier League against anyone. I think, frankly, if you were playing a lot of the teams at the top end of the Championship, you would get punished ruthlessly by playing like that, by showing that lack of confidence to even try and step a little bit up the pitch and stem the flow to your own box. Really expect more, particularly from centre-backs and goalkeeper in that situation. Communication, saying to players around you, look, leave me alone. I don't need you standing on my toes here to defend the long ball. And it would be a completely different thing, if Southampton were overloading with, huge numbers of players on the last line, if they were sending centre-backs forward to play like strikers and so on and so forth. I could understand centre-backs going, well, hang on, I want some help here. Can someone get back and drop? It's like, in that moment where Guilherme loses the ball and the camera pans back around to where our defence is, it's like Ross Stewart alone with like 8 players around him. And I just cannot understand how that happens on a football pitch without any one player going, hang on, what are we doing here? Let's get up. Especially when your manager and your coaches are all jumping up and down on the touchline, waving everyone forward and are being completely ignored, which I think gives good explanation for why, Fulkrug spoke in the way that he did after the match, and for why we've seen follow-up articles that suggest he's unlikely to be punished, because he was just kind of telling the truth. It was what it was. It was really, really, really disappointing, that last stage of the game. Look, we're going to stop because I think it would get depressing if we spoke too much about this game in isolation, because we'd just be going into some really, really, really terrible performances from so many players on the pitch. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about 1 year on from Moyes. What do we really need to reflect on to finally start moving in the right direction again? Well, if there was one thing that we spoke about in that kind of analysis of the game that we thought went at least a little bit well, it was that period of the second half where we were able to break away on some counter-attacks. We were able to score a goal. We were able to create a number of other decent opportunities in that period of the match. We were able to actually properly threaten Southampton. I remember speaking to you all the way back at the very start of the season. I think it was after the Crystal Palace game, and you were saying, well, I mean, it seems like counters still seem to be the main way that West Ham look good. I think if there's one theme to draw out of this game and kind of the season as a whole, it might just be that. Yeah,
I think like a lingering strength from the David Moyes era, or like his stamp on the team still. It seems to be essentially our key players come alive when they're given the chance to be direct, and they're in sort of, I guess what you would call like a broken field sort of state. So the team are sort of, the opposition team are sort of fragmented. I think really we retain the ball better at the back, but the conversion of that into useful attacking play is massively lacking. Whereas actually when we have less time on the ball and the conditions force us to be direct, our players sort of come alive. You give Kudus some space to carry in on transition, and you suddenly see him look like the player that we saw last year. You have Bowen as the highest point during a transitional moment, and suddenly he looks like the kind of deadly finisher around the box that we've become used to seeing. I think you're right. It's a very good demonstration of not even just that West Ham are good at counter-attacking, more of where the strengths are in terms of in possession, attacking phase sort of stuff in this squad. I think it's been very clear to see for quite a lot of the season, actually, that really our players look at their sharpest when they're given space and sort of, I guess, like pressure to go and, okay, you just need to go at the goal now because we're in transition, they're recovering, you need to get there first and make use of the advantage that has happened on the pitch. Whereas now a lot of the situations our attackers are facing are against more settled defences, and what we're finding is that doesn't necessarily suit their skill set, at least not in the ways that we've seen different managers across the season try to make it suit their skill set.
And how do we reflect on that recording on the 21st of April after a summer where, a big transition, to use the buzzword of the day, was launched to sort of try and play some more football, in inverted commas, to try and play football the right way, again in inverted commas. How do you then reflect on playing Southampton, who at the time coming into this game still had the lowest points total of any Premier League side in the history of the Premier League, and the only way you've really harmed them, the only way you've really hurt them, the only way you've really looked particularly competent as a team yourselves is in situations that are exactly the same almost carbon copy of the situations that the club has been doing really well in for the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, well, it's really hard, right? I think what I take from it is you have to learn that players are not blank slates. Players have certain situations and certain, more than situations, it's conditions and environments and ways of playing that really suit the skill set that they have. And you can't just switch out the system and expect a player to adapt to that system just because they're a good dribbler, for example, and therefore if I put their dribbling in this situation, these things will start to happen. I think this season for us has been a great case study in exactly that. You have, well, one, in terms of squad construction, our squad is obviously constructed in a way that was for a long time has been suited to more direct football, but I guess really the point I'm making is that you can't just expect the players to change because you've changed the manager. It's not that simple, unfortunately. And I think we've had a very rude awakening this whole season, learning exactly that.
Yeah, and also I think that's obviously impacted by how you do in the transfer market, right? Like if you're able to successfully turn over the squad over a series of windows, then it gives you more opportunity of transitioning the style. But when you look at the attempts to try and recruit players that would be able to enable us to play a new way at a higher level, I think it would be hard to say that a lot of those players have hit the ground running or performed particularly well at a consistent level. I mean, right through from Nijvergaard, Lucas Paquetá, Thilo Kehrer, Flynn Downs, to Guido Rodriguez, Jean-Claire Todibo, Nicholas Fulkrug, Crescencio Somerville, including other players in that period like Maxwell Cornet, like Areola, and even really like Emerson or Danny Ings. That's a lot of names I've just brought up, and really a lot of those players have either struggled for form, struggled for fitness, or already left the club due to not performing at the level that was expected at the time. Now, some of those players have done well in periods, but very few of those players have done well consistently across the entire piece since they joined. And I suppose we have to at least reference that when we're talking about trying to change the style, that of course we were going to have to sign players that would help improve us in different areas so that we would be able to play a different way. And it has a huge impact if the players you recruit to help you do that aren't able to perform at the level that you need them to perform, to replace individuals who maybe have previously performed at quite a high level in a slightly different environment and a slightly different set of conditions, or actually really in a very different set of conditions to the conditions that we have tried to set up this season, certainly under Julian Lopetegui. It's interesting to me though, we should come to this as well when we're talking about the two different managers this season. It's interesting to me that Graham Potter has done so much to sort of patch up the defense, has done so much to try and help the team be more compact. It does feel, particularly with that, like the second half performance against Southampton, it does feel a little bit like
we've
poor
walked
man's
ourselves.
impression.
Yeah,
Poor man's impression of what we used to be.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I don't think that's unfair at all. It definitely feels like the way that Potter has got more of or at least brought the variance down, is basically by reintroducing some of the principles or very similar principles to what the squad would have been used to under David Moyes. Essentially, that's how he's managed to sort of steady the ship a little bit. Which
at least in terms of the amount of outcomes that you could get in a game. But it's, obviously, like we have to say, it's, you can't really say steadying the ship in terms of reducing if the result is always lost, draw. That's not really.
Yeah. I mean, it's steadying the ship in terms of like I don't think we're going to go and ship 4 goals like we were earlier in the season, but I agree with it. We've definitely not got a load better for sure.
Well, you're almost getting to a position which is almost ridiculous to say, where if we ship for 1 week, but then we go and fluke a 3-0 because we're arriving in a lot of attacking situations the next week, then somehow get away with conceding 6 or 7 counters that a team doesn't put away, a la the Man United game at home. Don't know. He's picking up points in those conditions. Because right now we're not, and I think in order to execute the way that we have been playing a little bit more in recent weeks, you have to, in order to do well, you have to execute at a really high level. You have to defend well. You have to defend well as a team, and you just can't really get away with the kind of out of possession performance that we put in this match. I think it's forgivable to be not good enough in attack. It's forgivable to miss some big chances in attack, but to defend as poorly as we did in this game is really problematic for trying to do that, trying to kind of be more compact, trying to be harder to beat, because it does make it really difficult to get any kind of result if you can't hang your hat on the idea of we know we can keep clean sheets. Then you're setting yourselves up almost to fail, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. What's the point in defending deep if you then can't actually stop chances going in? And that's certainly how it felt against Southampton. I know the numbers won't necessarily reflect that. It's not like we got smashed on XG or anything, but this is a team that have struggled to score and create all season, have struggled to find repeatable routes all season. And actually, I think because obviously we watched a couple games in preparation for playing them, actually against us, I think was one, the most repeatable I've seen them be able to build up back to front, and 2, it was more repeatable than anything we did as well, which I think is the cherry on the icing of a very bad cake that has not been proved.
I think one tiny point to add to this section before we go on and talk into more depth and broader terms, I think especially it'd be really useful for us to sort of speak beyond West Ham about this, because I think there are some other examples across European football, across the league, that we can draw from to kind of have quite an interesting conversation about what's happened at West Ham over the last year, 2 years. Last point I want to come to is what a massive miss Aaron Wan-Bissaka was, because without his ability to kind of turn nothing into something, going from second phase, which is kind of when you're doing that, knocking the ball around sort of somewhat near to the halfway line, and it's sort of Kilman to Todibo to the right back, into Todibo, back to Kilman, out to the left back, and it's the ball's just kind of circulating side to side and doesn't really look like it's going anywhere. Without his ability to then go and dribble someone or play inside, receive round the other side, and then carry up the pitch and create something for us, we looked so stunted. We looked so unable to convert any of that possession into any kind of threat. So just a slight footer on the discussion we've had that Wan-Bissaka, a really big miss, and I think it highlighted just how impressive his individual level has been for the last couple of months in terms of contributing to West Ham both as an attacking side and as a defensive side, because even with all the 2v1s that we conceded down that side of the pitch, I imagine it doesn't feel like it's particularly controversial to say that Wan-Bissaka would have dealt with a lot of those situations a little bit better than Vladimir Sofal dealt with them, where I think he really struggled with the overloading he was experiencing on that side. And particularly noticeable with him, that I don't think we see so much with Wan-Bissaka, is that he can sometimes get caught in two minds defensively over, do I go and press or do I stay where I am? And he can kind of jump a little bit out and then start running back into the position that he was originally in. Whereas I think Wan-Bissaka's quite good at sort of, I've made my decision, I'm staying here and I'm not engaging, or I'm really fully committing to the press and I'm going to arrive with the right timing. I think that's been much better across the second half of the season. So a little bit of praise for someone that was missing, because we certainly missed him. Okay, we're on to the last section. The pod plan goes on forever from here. There's about 900 points to get through. So as I said, we are going to roll this on to extra time this week. We always do that second half of the podcast, but I think there's some really interesting discussion to be had in the second half of the pod this week. Usually we do a lot of individual performance chat, but I think this conversation could really go on for 3 podcasts alone. And I'm going to start it with a very difficult question, Darcy, so I apologise. We're 17th in the league. We failed to beat or even really put in a performance against Southampton, as we've said repeatedly on this podcast. And I think worth saying they performed quite well in this game, even if they have been one of the worst teams the Premier League has ever seen. And we do need to repeat that because that's where we are and that's the level. How on earth did we get here?
The $1 million question. Well, I think to start, it's probably in sort of search or in chasing for something better in terms of and improving, right? Like, I know we now look back on the David Moyes era very positively, but towards the end, actually, things were not going so well. We actually didn't really have a way of like retaining the ball in our own third. There were some things that were not going well, and we were conceding a lot of chances.
We were defending terribly. We defended terribly in the second half of that season. We were awful defensively.
Yeah. So actually, I think at least some of the underpinning logic behind sort of searching for something different in terms of the way we play football wasn't the wrong thing to be thinking about at all. However, I think there's been maybe the attempts have maybe been a little bit misinformed, or I guess we talked about it before as well. I think on like ETs where almost the reaction is the complete polar opposite. So we're looking for something very super heavy on ball dominance, essentially, with the idea being if you have more of the ball, that you're able to reduce the amount of variance in outcomes because you have more of the ball in your possession. But really, I think the asterisk with that is that's only true if you're able to execute it. And I think maybe what we're starting to see is that actually we don't have a squad that can necessarily execute it consistently.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think we have to start by saying I think there's too binary an approach to how you play football in sort of broader discussions that exist in the fan base, and it's been really kind of disappointing to see that reflected again in the way that the club is being managed, where it seems like there's kind of only 2 ways that we think about playing football, as either you defend and you counter-attack, or you're a really free-flowing attacking team and you dominate the ball and you're really fun to watch and all that stuff. And actually, you know, you might have those 2 things at really, you know, polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but there's a whole massive amount of stuff in between, and different things that you can attempt to do in between. And it does feel sometimes like we sort of oscillate between one end of that spectrum all the way across to the other end, and we try and make this sort of massive, or frankly ridiculous transition in the space of one summer or in the space of one window, which is just, you know, not really feasible. And the reason that's not feasible is because theoretical ideas about how you want the team to play only really have any basis in reality when the execution phase is considered, because, you know, it's a sport, it's a physical thing, it doesn't exist in our heads, it doesn't exist on a tack board, it doesn't exist on a lineup maker, it doesn't exist in that plane. It exists on a pitch in real life with 22 real people that have strengths and weaknesses, things they can do, things they can't do, things they're good at, things they're not good at, and you need to consider so much more. You need to help those players produce their best. You need to understand what those players are good at. Well, that's such a crucial part of it. You have to understand what those strengths and weaknesses are, and you have to understand how to. I always kind of talk about the job of management as being how can we maximize what we have and maximize the strengths that we have in the group, and minimize and hide the weaknesses that we have, and protect against arriving in the situations where those things are obvious. If you're thinking, well, how does that actually work in real terms? If you have someone like Craig Dawson as your centre back, you probably not want to get into too many situations where the defence is really high up the pitch, because pace is not one of his stronger elements, and therefore you naturally think, well, if we want to make sure that we platform this guy's strengths, he's really, really good in the air. He's really good at when he gets into duels, really good in the tackle, really strong, really difficult to shove about, positions himself in the box quite well to be able to clear the box. Right, well, maybe we want to set the defensive line a little bit deeper so that we can help this guy to do his best work. And I think, we've got a line in the pod plan that's strong decision making, therefore must retain some balance between theory and execution. And I think that's where the missing link in the chain so often is that decision making that we have loses the balance so often, and it becomes too dominated by theory and forgets the actual execution phase. And if we were to try and sort of drag that back into reality, what do you think that looks like at West Ham?
Well, I think you just kind of have to look at the way that I think of it anyway is sort of like building a team bottom up versus building a team top down, right? And when you build a team top down, what you do is you go, well, this is the way I want to play, and these players are going to do it. And because they're going to follow my instructions and X, Y, Z. Or you build it bottom up and you go, well, what are the strengths of my players? And if we look at the West Ham attack, for example, Lucas Paquetá, I'd say his singular biggest strength is probably how good he is at passing directly. And then Mohammed Kudus, one of his biggest strengths is probably how directly he's able to carry. And then when Jarrod Bowen, it's his movement around the box and being a direct runner in those sort of situations, right? If you look at those as kind of the three of the biggest strengths in your attack, you come to the conclusion that playing a certain type of way sort of accentuates how often you get to see those traits from those players. Whereas if you do the other way and you go top down, you're not really considering what the strengths and the weaknesses are of those players. And to me, anyway, it seems like exactly what you said, like the theory element has sort of outweighed the application element in the decision making about what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months. Sort of disregarded the idea that we were very good when we sort of lent into some more direct principles because that's what suited our players, in search of this sort of I guess like fantastical idea that we're going to become a possession-based team that's able to control the game that way, yet still get these traits out of these players, these strengths out of these players within those conditions. And actually, I think when you step back and think about it and think about the conditions created by dominating the ball versus leaning into more pragmatic, direct principles, you can see actually why our squad was so good at the prior and is actually a lot worse at the latter.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Cal, if you're listening in New York, you'll be thinking, Jack's so cheeky, he's waiting for me to go away, and then straight away he's having this conversation with Darcy without me. Look, I think it's really important we consider two things. One, there's a whole spectrum of ways to play and enable these direct situations, right? And I think one of the issues that there is in this conversation is, like I said, this very binary approach to how to play. So if we want to create more direct kind of attacking situations that feel a little bit like counterattacks or are counterattacks, the only way we can do that is by defending with 11 bodies in our own penalty area or 10 bodies in our own penalty area, lumping the ball up to a striker, and then having the odd breakaway attack, but the rest of the time looking like a really stubborn defensive unit that doesn't actually properly try and play any football or try and do anything particularly ambitious when we have the ball. And I think it's really important to dispel that completely, because it's complete nonsense. Like, I don't think that's at all close to reality, because there are so many different examples of so many different managers, so many different football clubs that have enabled exactly these kinds of situations for their attackers, and have gone about enabling these situations or creating these situations in so many different ways, whether that be, maybe Nuno Espirito Santo and David Moyes more towards one end of the spectrum, even though those guys maybe approach things a little bit differently defensively. Nuno's been really successful this season, or started the season very successfully with sort of like a 4-2-4 defensive approach, whereas David Moyes has often tried to operate from a little bit more of a 4-4-2 or 4-2-3-1 defensive approach. But I think more on the sort of similar end of the scale, through towards maybe the middle of the scale, where you have guys like Thomas Frank or Antonio Raiola, who are creating very similar situations for their attackers, but doing them in completely different ways. So Thomas Frank really keen on kind of short and quite slow build-up play, and lots of players back towards the goalkeeper, lots of passes between. If you look at actually, and you probably wouldn't expect this, which goalkeepers played the most passes in the Premier League this season? I think it's very likely, and I think it is, as I last checked, Thomas Flecken, or Mark Flecken, sorry. So yeah, I don't think that would necessarily be expected, but it's reflective of the way that the Brentford build up. And then they used Mikkel Damsgaard, but previously it was Matthias Jensen, and they've been much more successful this season because Mikkel Damsgaard's been amazing as this kind of enabler for play the ball to him, and then he generates this attack. And we have Mbomo, we have Visser, we have Kenan Sharda, whoever it is, right up on the last line. And we're able to kind of be really direct, really dynamic when we actually then look to transition forwards at speed. You've got Antonio Iraola, who does that completely differently with this high press, this chasing of the second balls, this idea of, yet again, trying to play sort of somewhat slow around your defenders, and then these direct passes that come from the centre-backs that go out to maybe towards the wide areas, towards someone like Antoine Semenyo. We try and win the first ball. If we don't win the first ball, we've got Ryan Christie and Lewis Cook or Scott or Justin Cliver. All these guys really, really hungry and really good at anticipating where the ball will drop and chasing it down. Tyler Adams also been really, really good this season in moments doing that for Bournemouth. We win the ball, and then we're able to attack really dynamically because and the game's kind of broken down. There's been an aerial that's been contested. They've stepped forward to try and press us. There are players all over the pitch, not where they would like to be in settled defence, and then we can really rapidly get the ball into Evan Nielsen or Semenyo or Ouattara or Sinistera or all of these really dangerous players and create a chance really quickly. And then right at the other end of the scale, you've got maybe Roberto De Zerbi, who lots of possession, wants to knock the ball around ad nauseum in the back line. You've got centre backs that are stopping and putting their foot on the ball. But what is that about? Why are they doing that? Because they're drawing players up the pitch to press them, and then you see this sort of rehearsed set of really quick passes, diagonal passes through the middle of the pitch, and then the ball gets whacked out to Solly March, or it gets whacked out to Karim Matoma in the wide area, and then we're attacking 3v3 or 4v3, and it feels like a counter-attack, but it's not a counter-attack because it started with our very own slow possession, but the entire aim was about generating this sort of situation. So I think it's really important to talk about at the top of this discussion, because it's not that if you want to generate these types of situations for your attackers, there's only one way that you can do that, and it's completely antithetical to trying to keep the ball, because there are managers that have created these situations very successfully in the Premier League and in other leagues around Europe that have done it whilst having generally more of the ball than their opponents. Even Unai Emery at Aston Villa does a lot of this kind of direct, dynamic attacking, getting Morgan Rogers into situations where he can run through space at speed, carries so well. Ollie Watkins rolling off into that left half space. Marcus Rashford is doing the same at Villa now. Really, really good at creating these direct attacking situations where players like Moussa Diaby thrived, or we've said Rogers or Leon Bailey has done really quite well as well. So loads and loads of examples of approaches to creating these situations, and there's not only one way to do that. And the second thing that I think is really important to speak about is that we often talk about players who are performing maybe in the most extreme version of that discussion, so on the Nuno or Moyes end of things. If they're performing really well, I think we too often speak about these players as sort of like untapped potential or sort of somehow underutilized. So this was very much the case at West Ham with Bowen, with Paquetá, with Kudus last season. So you've got these guys that are producing incredible numbers of goals and assists. I think they combined for 28 goals last season, and that's without factoring any of their assists. They just scored 28 goals between them in the Premier League last season. They're on 16 goals so far this season. And yet last season they were really talked about a lot in discussions about West Ham that were both within the fan base and by media organisations and so on and so forth. It's kind of like, well, what could these guys do? You know, how good could these guys be if they were actually platformed to see more of the ball, to have more touches, to get into more situations where they could attack? And I think this motivates an important question for me, which is, let's look at Nottingham Forest this season. Anthony Elanga is a really good example of this, I think. Should Anthony Elanga, or would Anthony Elanga be better if Nottingham Forest focus next season, because they finished high up the table this season playing a more counter-attacking brand of football? Would Anthony Elanga be better if Forest were to focus on trying to get him loads and loads more touches and to play a more dominant style of football, if they were to try and play maybe something a little bit like, Ange Postecoglou's Spurs to approach that kind of idea of playing football. I think, Darcy, if you could even give us the most basic sense of what Anthony Elanga does. How has he scored so many goals this season? How's he been so good this season?
Well, he runs in behind very quickly all the time. So if you then want to give him the ball to feet and get him to take players on, his output is probably going to go down.
As such, do you think Anthony Elanga would be, based on his performance this season, a really good player? This is not at all any kind of negative comment on Anthony Elanga. Do you think he, and also not a comment disparaging Forest in any way, but good enough for, someone like a Chelsea or a Man City to come in for him in the summer?
Probably not, no, because the game state is not, and the game plan are not transferable, right? And Elanga is actually the perfect example of a player who's being platformed by his system currently. He looks really, really good because of the system. It's not that he's being held back by it at all. It's the exact opposite.
So if not, why should Forest? Would we have the same discussion about Forest that we did so consistently about West Ham? Should Forest change the way that they play because they've arrived towards the top of the table? Do they need to now transition to being a position?
Yeah,
is that the discussion?
Evidently not. Evidently they shouldn't. This is what Forest are good at. But I completely agree with your point and see your point in terms of why was that a viable discussion at West Ham then? It makes complete sense. And I think it's kind of one of the questions that needs to be asked, doesn't it? Why were we so insistent on trying to chase something better when we already had something good?
We had something that was good that had started to break down. And it was right that there was a view to, we have to find a way to improve. We have to find a way to be better. Because if you're not finding a way to improve, if you're not looking for ways to improve in the Premier League, you're standing still and teams will just overtake you.
You're going to stagnate, yeah.
So you absolutely have to always look for ways to improve. But for me, such an important part of this discussion that we haven't had at West Ham, that we have ignored at West Ham, is if you've got layers that exist, if you are doing something right, if you are scoring lots of goals, if you look dangerous in certain situations, how can we build atop the foundations that we've had, rather than what it feels like West Ham have done is go, well, yeah, we're doing a lot of these things quite nicely, but because we've got this idea of how football should be played, because we've got this idea of what the right way to play football is, what I would describe as kind of a really hierarchical set of ideas about football tactics, as in some ideas are good and some ideas are bad. Because this is a bad idea that we might be doing well, actually what we're going to do is we're going to take a sledgehammer to the foundations, get rid of all the stuff that we're doing well to build something completely new. Why would you do that? I don't understand the motivation to do that. And if the idea behind doing that is that, well, we're going to regenerate the squad, we're going to rebuild the squad, we're going to build a new and improved group of players, a young group of players that are going to help us to be successful in an entirely different way, does that idea hinge on the fact that, well, we've got that guy that we can sell for 80 million quid, we've got this guy that we can sell for 85 million quid, we've got that guy who we can sell for 90 million quid, Bowen, Kudus, Paquetá? Is an important part of selling those guys not helping them to perform at their best level? And are we not sitting here now approaching a summer transfer window thinking, well, it's not, where are we going to get the money from to turn over the squad
some cash, yeah.
in the way that we need to? And how are we going to sell those guys for the amount that we need to be able to help rebuild the squad, regenerate it, to do something completely different? And if you're not convinced, I've got one question that I would like to land on at the end. I really like watching Brentford. I think Thomas Frank's a brilliant manager. When we've had previous discussions about, who should we have targeted as a manager for West Ham, I often brought up Thomas Frank as a guy that I really liked and thought was doing really good things at Brentford. I actually really like any manager who comes out with one of the most important things they have is a no dickhead policy. I think that's a really good that's a really good approach to football management. And if you're not convinced by the stuff that we've been speaking about, that maybe this kind of this platforming of theory, or this theoretical idea of like the manager is the most important and how we play and the ideas are the most important, not the players on the pitch, and not helping the players to be really good. I ask you this about Brentford, and Bowen and Wissa have been two of the best attackers in the Premier League this season. I just leave you with this thought, and join us on Extra Time if you want to explore this thought in more depth, because it's exactly what we're going to go on and do. Been really, really good in Bowen and Wissa this season. Great value, great to watch, scored loads of goals, combined together for a huge number of goals. I think they're only behind Salah and Luis Diaz this season in the Premier League for the amount of goals that they've contributed with Brentford this season. Would they perform exactly the same and produce the same numbers and produce the same output if they were playing for Manchester City under Pep Guardiola? In that style of play, if they were playing for Tottenham under Ange Postecoglou, if they were trying to play this really dominant possession-focused brand of football, they would see a lot of the ball, but maybe the spaces would be a lot smaller. There wouldn't be so much space to attack in behind. Do we think they would be just as good? And if not, how do we reflect on West Ham in that context? Thank you very much, Darcy. I think it's important that we just sort of begin to have the conversation in these terms, because I think it will really help us kind of look towards the future and what needs to be done, ultimately either in changing the players or changing the approach to help the players, to help West Ham move forward. And if you want to talk about this more, join us over on Extra Time on Patreon, in the comments on Discord. We'll be having this conversation all week over there. And I'm very much looking forward to that, because I think it's actually more interesting moving away from just this one game and moving towards the future for West Ham and what that might look like. I hope you're not feeling too disappointed after the Southampton game, and I hope we're able to improve your mood next week, although I don't feel too hopeful about that. But yes, we'll see you over on Extra Time, and join us for the preview over on Patreon. See you all then.